Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. Imagine being threatened with a lien on your home because you refused to spend $500 on a mandatory mailbox. I fought back against the HOA with everything I had, but the HOA president's midnight revenge plot that backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Let's dive right into the story. And the first one is titled, HOA Sued Me Over a $500 mailbox, so I spent $33,000 to get revenge and teach them a lesson. Have you ever driven past one of those neighborhoods where every single house is exactly the same? They've got teeny tiny little yards and are usually tall and a bit skinny. I imagine they are attempting to recreate a white picket fence suburbia that is a fiction of the 1950s, as if it is even worth bringing that back. But of course, it's more likely in my mind that they just create a neighborhood that is only attractive to people sleeping their way through life without any personality. When I drive through a neighborhood, I always look for the houses that have an interesting splash of color, a vibrant and growing garden, a unique architectural design, or at the very least, a unique mailbox. Maybe my view does not take into account a cohesive image of an entire neighborhood, but I think that the individual house is a more interesting canvas than an entire neighborhood. I guess if you clicked on this story, my mention of mailboxes is obviously not accidental. I won't be facetious and claim that I spent thousands of dollars in order to keep a mailbox that I thought was more artful in my yard or described my personality best. Really, I just hate HOAs and what they stand for, and I would hate to see my beautiful neighborhood reduced to cookie-cutter nightmare, the one I was talking about. I'm fortunate to live in an affluent neighborhood, and I'm also unfortunate enough to have other members of my community that want that perfect lack of personality. As if it were not enough that these people think that uniformity is akin to godliness, they are also proof that any modicum of power in the hands of the wrong person leads to immediate corruption and abuse of said power. When I moved into the neighborhood, I knew that it would be near impossible to avoid an HOA. Affluent neighborhoods have them at almost all times for a few different reasons. Probably the most annoying one of these reasons is that there are at least a handful of households that have one homemaker. This is a completely respectable way to go about your life, but for some people, it obviously bores them to death, and it doesn't help that many of the wealthier homemakers might never have been told no in their lives. Well, one thing leads to another, and we arrive at a community under the thumb of a tyrannical group of homebodies who cannot even get their kids to like them half the time. I knew the HOA was likely unavoidable, but I requested to meet with the HOA board for every neighborhood I was attempting to live in. If they refused to meet me, it likely meant that they were not actually focused on their community's opinions, and even if they weren't, I was not wanting to risk them being bad in some way I couldn't figure out ahead of time. Out of the ones I did get to meet with, most seemed harmless, but a few were chock full of red flags. The neighborhood that I ended up choosing was conveniently the only one that actually had an HOA with a board that I went past just respecting and actually liked. For the first few years, the situation stayed the same, but a few people left the board, and eventually the head of the HOA that I had built a good friendship with moved to a different city with their partner. This meant that a new HOA board president had to be elected, and the changed members of the board meant that we got someone who really could not be trusted with power as president. She then immediately replaced more of the board to make the entire organization almost unrecognizable. Ever since I moved into the neighborhood, I had the same mailbox. It was a simple mailbox on a wooden post, relatively simple and cheap by design. It is reliable and does not draw attention in a positive or negative way. I do a good bit of yard work, or sometimes pay a service when I cannot find the energy to do it myself, and my mailbox stays clean and structurally sound, and I've replaced it one time when it did get seriously damaged. Now, I don't do this because the HOA asks me to or because I think it lifts up the community as a whole. I do this because I think that my house and yard reflects on me and my family, and others in the neighborhood don't seem to care about this, even though everyone in my neighborhood can at the very least afford to pay someone to maintain simple things like this, or other similar mailboxes in the neighborhood have fallen into disrepair. So this new tyrant HOA apparently views this as a massive source of shame upon our entire community. Let's go over this briefly and see what might be a possible solution to this. So do we A. change something in the HOA contract to indicate level of property upkeep, B. provide connections to a service that can do the service, C. A and B, or D. Add a clause to the HOA contract that requires each and every member of the neighborhood to spend $500 on a mailbox. It should not surprise you that they chose option D, and to make it even better, they never brought this up to the community or asked for a vote. One of the things I was trying to avoid with HOAs was one that did not take the community's opinion into account, which is exactly what made this situation so infuriating. Like, even if the money is easy enough for anyone in the community to cough up, the principle of not asking your community before trying to charge them all $500 when we already pay monthly dues just does not make any sense. I don't even think the mailbox is an eyesore or anything, I just think that what can look pretty good on its own ends up looking crappy when you drive through a neighborhood and see 50 of the same damn things. That is basically a huge preamble to explain that this whole situation was not about the money. That's why I was willing to cough up legal fees that make the cost of the mailbox look like a TV dinner versus a gourmet 5-course dinner or more. After they changed the contract to include the clause of this required mailbox, I immediately balked and refused to make the change they asked for. They did not even have the guts to inform us through a community meeting. They just sent out a mass email and it was immediately comply or risk fines for being found in contempt of the contract. It was my personal opinion that this contract was far too much of a revision to allow contractual obligation without the agreement of the contract holders. I disagreed with how they notified us, so I decided that I would just not change anything. This was not noticed for the first couple of weeks while other people were still going through the process of changing their mailboxes, but once their special deadline came about, I received a request for proof that I was going through the effort of getting it changed. I replied to the email with the simple statement, "I'm not." And of course, this hurt their delicate sensibilities, and so I received an immediate reply back with a semi-professional reply that from what I can tell is the equivalent of, "Excuse me, what the hell is that supposed to mean?" When I responded back that I would not be updating my mailbox and I was not a fan of significant changes to the HOA contract in this manner, that is when they got really annoyed. So I ended up with a few notices pinned to my door. When I replied by asking if they could simply hold a community meeting and get the consent from the residents before they fined me, they did not even deem that worthy of a response. I had already asked members of the community, and even if they didn't mind getting the mailboxes, none of them liked it. They continued with their posturing, and I responded with a cease and desist letter. My HOA president took the time out of her busy and very important day of not walking pets and not maintaining a garden and not working and not cleaning to come to my doorstep. And if you think it is odd that I mention how busy her day is, just know that I did it because that's how she started the conversation. Yes, she actually said, "OP, I'm sure you're wondering why I took time out of my busy schedule, full of critical work for the community, in order to come visit you." I replied, "No, I can pretty safely guess that you are here about my mailbox. That would imply that you're aware that there's an issue with your mailbox," she said. I would rather mop a bathroom with my tongue than deal with this bureaucratic circle jerk style of conversation. I deadpanned back, "That would explain the letters I've been shredding. I'm here to notify you of the official fine. The penalties for not fulfilling the conditions could go as far as to allow us to put a lien on your home." After saying that, she produced a copy of the contract from her folder. She had a bookmarked and highlighted page. "You will see here that this is well within our conditions within the original contract, and I don't believe you can find an issue with that." Well, since the fine itself comes from an unlawful addendum, I find an issue with it. The fine was $5,000, starting out with certain conditions adding to it, and of course late penalties. I did not pay a penny though. Well, I did not pay a penny to them. Instead, I paid a lawyer and we put together a suit. And by the way guys, that's a good idea. Don't pay a penny to the HOA if they fine you for BS reasons. Instead, pay a lot of pennies to a lawyer to teach the HOA a lesson. If you would do it the same, and if you enjoy my HOA stories, please don't forget to like the video because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much, and now let's continue. My lawyer agreed I had a basis for the suit and could win it, but if they challenged or appealed, then it could turn into a battle. This was not a case of huge sweeping mistakes in their contract though. This was a situation with some technicalities and previous decisions that backed up my initial gut feeling that the change was unethical. I waited until I got another response from the HOA before moving forward, though, funnily enough, they put together their own cease and desist letter to respond to the research that I'd been putting together on the community reaction to the addendum and thought that I was spreading dissent in the community. They actually included the threat to sue me for defamation if I didn't stand down, and finally there was a reason to go to a community meeting. I walked in right after I heard the president greeting the meeting and walked up to the podium. Quietness fell over the room other than a few mumbled conversations as people wondered what was about to happen. The shock on the HOA president's face was funny. She tried to recover and said, "While I know that you've wanted us to convene a community meeting for a while, I would prefer that you follow procedure before you bring forward your issue." I gave her what I hope was a really smug grin and smacked the notification of the suit onto the podium. I would wait, but I don't have much time, and I have a lot of critical work that needs to be done. The HOA has been sued. The fun part about being in this situation as a person with wealth in a community of affluent people, and I mean fun with the most sarcasm ever injected into it, is that nothing can ever be straightforward. Yeah, I got enough money to have a lawyer on retainer, I won't try to deny my privilege, but the husband of the HOA president owns his own law firm and practices. While this should realistically mean that he recognizes the error of his wife's ways and is okay with settling and allowing me to keep my mailbox, in actuality it means that he wrote the flawed contract and is gonna fight tooth and nail to make a win cost me far more than it is worth. To top that off, if we screw up, I lose and we get nothing. 3.5 years. Between the initial breach of contract hearing, depositions from 70 different homeowners, expert testimony on HOA governance law, appeals to the state appellate court, and the final settlement negotiations, it took 3.5 grueling years for this nightmare to end. But when it did, the victory was absolute. The court ruled definitely in my favor on multiple fronts. So first, they found that the HOA's unilateral contract modification violated both our original CC&Rs and state HOA law, requiring a supermajority vote for material changes. Second, they determined that the $5,000 fine structure was punitive rather than compensatory, making it legally unenforceable. Third, and most satisfying, they ruled that the HOA president and her lawyer husband had acted in bad faith by threatening litigation they knew was baseless. My legal fees totaled around $33,000, but the HOA was ordered to pay $47,200 in my attorney fees under the state's prevailing party statute, plus $15,000 in compensatory damages for the stress and time lost dealing with the harassment. They also had to reimburse every homeowner who had already purchased the mandatory mailboxes another $23,500 across 47 households. The total cost to the HOA exceeded $85,000, not including their own legal fees, which I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, approached $60K. As part of the settlement, sweeping governance reforms were implemented. Any future HOA rule changes now require a 60% supermajority vote by all homeowners, not just the board members. The HOA president was immediately removed and barred from serving on the board for 5 years. Most importantly, a homeowner bill of rights was added to our CC&Rs, including protections against retaliatory enforcement and requirements for transparent financial reporting. However, the former HOA president, apparently unable to accept defeat gracefully, decided to get her revenge in the most foolish way possible. 6 weeks after the settlement was finalized, my Ring doorbell captured her at 2:47 a.m. taking a baseball bat to my mailbox. The footage was crystal clear. Her face, her license plate, even the sound of her muttering, "Smack bastard," as she destroyed the post. I called the cops immediately and pressed charges for criminal mischief, but here's where things got really interesting. So mailboxes are considered federal property under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1705, and destroying a mailbox is not just vandalism, it is a federal crime punishable by up to 3 years in prison and fines up to $250K. Clearly, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service doesn't mess around. When I contacted them with the video evidence, they launched a full investigation. They discovered this was not her first offense. She had actually been caught on another neighbor's security camera damaging their mailbox 2 years earlier during a different HOA dispute. Though those homeowners had not pressed charges at the time, the federal prosecutor was particularly interested in the pattern of behavior and the clear retaliatory motive. They charged her under federal mail tampering statutes, and with her prior history and the premeditated nature, aka the baseball bat, the late hour, the clear audio of her voice, she was looking at serious jail time. Her lawyer husband tried every legal maneuver possible, but federal mail crimes are prosecuted aggressively. The evidence was overwhelming: high-definition video, audio, clear motive, and a pattern of behavior. She eventually pled guilty to avoid trial and received 18 months in federal prison, 2 years of supervised probation, and $15,000 in fines and restitution. The neighborhood was stunned. The woman who had terrorized us with threats of liens and lawsuits over mailbox aesthetics was now a federal felon. Her husband's law practice took a major hit from the scandal, and they ended up selling their house and moving out of state after her release. As for my mailbox, I replaced it with the exact same $35 model from Home Depot. The new board operates with complete transparency, and we haven't had a single frivolous enforcement action since. Sometimes the best revenge is not just winning, it is making sure the lesson sticks. And the next one is an absolutely amazing story from r/malicious compliance that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "If Larry Likes You, You Are Good." And by the way, this was actually both posted on Petty Revenge as well as Malicious Compliance. So years ago, I worked for a large newspaper when they acquired a lot of assets of another large paper that went out of business. I was a temp in the HR office. It was sad to see so many people come in from the dead newspaper to try and work for the other paper. My job was to gather the resumes and give them a handout of job resources and to direct them where they could apply for all the benefits that they may be eligible for. When my boss, Larry, saw me waiting outside the building in the morning, they asked why I was there so early. I explained that I took the bus so I could either take the bus that got me there early or the one that would get me to work 90 minutes late. I opted to be early. Larry agreed and they changed my hours to allow me to arrive earlier and leave earlier. It worked well because I could get a lot done for the office before people arrived. When I left in the afternoon, a second temp was there for all the processing needs from the day. It was seamless. Larry called my agency and extended my contract from 6 weeks to 6 months. They wanted to make me permanent, but there was a process to be followed. Larry sent a memo to everyone concerning my schedule, explaining my schedule needs. A manager above Larry, a man named Jack, told him that he could not show favoritism to me and I needed to comply with the assigned schedule or be replaced. Jack then told Larry that there were no allowances for scheduling special needs of employees. The next day, my boss, Larry, told me all this and asked if I could get a ride in the morning so that I could be on time versus early. I tried my best, but I was unable to do so. He told me to just keep coming in early, but don't clock in until time. As for the afternoon, he asked if I could stay until normal time and clock out. I agreed, even though it would make me now having to wait a long time in the evening for the bus. My first day on the new schedule, the very boss that refused my schedule modifications, Jack, walked up to my desk. "I need these photocopies in triplicate." Before I could answer, Larry did. "She's not on the clock for another 20 minutes. She can do it after she clocks in between her regular duties." Jack said, "She is on the clock, she can work." Larry replied ever so sweetly, "No, she is not. You said no schedule modifications. She would have been on the clock, but she is not now." Jack asked to see Larry in the office. Larry agreed and I could hear raised voices. I kept reading my book quietly, but watching the time. Just before I was to sign in, Larry called me in and said, "Effective today, you are to go back to your schedule that was modified." I nodded, clocked in, and made the copies before people began arriving. Larry would eventually climb the ladder there, taking over the position Jack held. I wish more bosses were as awesome as Larry. And yeah guys, if you ever had such an awesome boss, please let me know in the comments because I'm really looking forward to some wholesome stories. And before we end the video, let's read another malicious compliance story. It is titled, "You think I'm fudging my hours? You are right, here's my real hours." So I worked for a nonprofit in 2019 after being a volunteer member since the 2000s. It was supposed to be temporary for 3 months or so, but the nonprofit dragged their feet hiring a permanent replacement. I'm fairly well off, to be honest, not filthy rich but debt-free and comfortable and did not need the money, so I never billed for my hours after working 15 months full-time. It was supposed to be $25 per hour, Canadian dollar currency, but I was willing to work for free if they found a replacement in a reasonable time. They were pressuring me for an invoice, so I finally invoiced them for 40 hours per week for 15 months, and it was about a high $60,000, Canadian dollars. They were livid for a variety of reasons that I did not even understand. They accused me of lying about my hours because I was a new father and my wife had gone back to work after maternity leave, so there's no way I could have worked that much. When I told them that I had my son in daycare instead of staying at home with him, they sarcastically said, Now you know what it's like to work an actual job like the rest of us. They were mad that I was not volunteering my time anymore like I used to, but I insisted I was, and that my billed time was only for the TV bingo fundraiser and not for any other non-profit activities. However, no dice, they did not believe me. I tried to tell them my hours were actually more than I billed for, and my hourly rate is greatly reduced compared to what I normally charge for all the work I was doing, which included IT, e-commerce, web design, marketing, HR, operations, bookkeeping, TV production, etc. But finally, they said they did not care about the rate reduction. They insisted that I charge my normal rates for my actual hours and then deduct 10 hours a week for volunteering, which is about 10 times more hours than any of them volunteer for. But okay, bet, I will comply. So then, here's what I did. I started charging them $40 to $125 per hour, depending on the task. I recorded all my tasks and hours in great detail. I charged for any time I spent doing what was normally volunteer work for the non-profit. Then I finally deducted 10 hours a week. I was billing an average of 50 hours a week after the volunteer hours were deducted. I also took the opportunity to start hiring more people under me on their dime, so I could work way less than I did in the first 15 months, but still get paid the same, if not more. They could not say anything because it was exactly what they asked for. I was billing $1,000 a week before malicious compliance, and then about $3,000 a week after malicious compliance, which I started to trim back down closer to $1,000 per week after cutting my own hours. And by the way guys, so it seems like if you wanna up your salary, malicious compliance is the way forward. Anyway, these guys kept doubling down and accusing me of incompetence and fraud over the next year and a half that I continued working, but I didn't care anymore. They turned my passion into a crappy job that I didn't need, so I stayed until all my amazing employees were hopefully set up for success and wrote that non-profit out of my life for good. I did not feel any guilt over being paid for my time with them because I had raised more money for them in 30 months, around 30 million gross, about 20 million net, than they had raised in the 100 years before then. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. If you cannot get enough of my videos, please check out my playlist on the left, and I will see you again tomorrow.